Hey everybody, welcome back to our ECS series. Definitely been a while. There's been quite a few changes in the ECS API. Kind of wanted to wait till it settled a bit before I, constantly updated our our project. So I think we're in a good place right now that I decided to make a quick video. As you can see, I'm running 2019.2A9, so that's the minimum at least for this project. Anything after that should be good. And I have a preview 31, which I believe came out uh, March or May 1st. So in any case, nothing crazy has changed. It's just really minor changes. So go ahead and update your project. I'm not going to show that, but basically you're going to have a bunch of errors, and that brings us to talking about what happened since we last made this project. So I'm going to start from 0.0.23 and just talk about what things changed and what's new in the API. So quite a few changes. 2018.3 has been dropped, so make sure you're at least on 2019.1. But for my project, you actually need to be on at least the beta or alpha builds due to just entities being a little ahead of the curve for that. A bunch of renaming things. Instead of subtractive, you're using exclude. Position, there's no more position. It's now translation. So translation is kind of like the go-to for a lot of positioning things like that. And scale, non-uniform scale. This was a big one. Attached components removed. No transform hierarchy. We use this for our highlighting system, so had to change that. So now we're using a more parent-child relationship. It is a little bit cleaner, so I'm happy about that. But we'll just have to show how to make those changes. All of these different arrays have been deprecated, so you gotta use the right way, which if you've been following my videos, we've been using a lot of iJob process component data and iJob chunk anyways, so you should be good there. A lot of component system hierarchical stuff, we don't care about that for our project. You can read more about that, and I think that's it for for point 23. You can see the new translated transform related components in the redesign. 24, they just have a nice way of doing entities with and for each. Their examples are really good at that. We hardly use component systems. We use job systems, so we're not going to be using this too often. And again, there's good examples on that already. So moving into 25, we can use bool, so we can get rid of our bloatable bool that we kind of handcrafted. We can just use regular bool. So and as you can see right here, 2019.1 B5 is required. So just get the latest beta or alpha, and you should be good to go. Let's see, 26. It was just minor fix, and then 27 was another big one. So you can actually create script templates now using assets create ECS menu. I haven't used this. They're super easy to use, but if you want to use the built-in behaviors, feel free to go ahead. Just much more deprecations for each inject. We got rid of a lot of these, so we don't have to worry too much about that. The biggest ones are probably component data array and shared component data array. Script behavior, this is more of backend stuff. The API system, the API updater is not able to do majority of these changes, so that's why when you update your project, you're going to have a bunch of changes. Of course, you could just download my project. It's on GitHub. Everything's updated, and it should be good to go, and you can start from there. But if you're looking for the upgrade process, then this is what this video is for. iJob process component data is iJob for each, so we do go through this change. And component group is now entity query. So these are definitely not bad changes. A lot of these are really good changes. The code feels cleaner, and you'll see that in a little bit. And I think this point 28 just got released. Preview 31, that's what we're on now. Some extra stuff that we don't care for now. So let me just show. Verify that we're working, and so when we click and right click, click right click, click right click, and collision is still working using our made system. When you click away, those work. You can swap easily. So we are good. So let's start with what changed. So we have these, instead of having a whole bunch of random game object scripts that get added, all we have is two simple things to spawn our units. We have convert to entity, which basically convert to entity is a new way that Unity implemented that allows you to turn any game object representation into entity representation. Really cool, so you can turn pretty much anything you can think of in the mono behavior world and turn into the entity world. Haven't played around with it a lot. With this project, we generally stayed pure to the ECS paradigm. So, but feel free to look that up. There's a lot of good documentation on the Unity forums for that. And unit spawner proxy is basically our unit spawner from before, but instead of giving it an archetype, we're giving it a prefab actually, and we're giving our count X and Y. Now, I did copy a lot of this from their examples to turn it into what I needed for the RTS project. This player unit is pretty simple. It's everything we need for our. It's just a cube with our mesh renderer, and it's a game object entity. So nothing. We're gonna add everything else in script. I wanted to keep as pure as possible and using interfacing with the hybrid only when absolutely necessary. So we can get into unit spawner proxy, as this is the first thing. So we have this interesting requires entity conversion, and it does what it says. It requires, it's a mono behavior, and we require converting it to an entity system. I declared reference prefab and I convert, so these are just the interfaces needed for this convert. So pretty much, if you think about it, everything here is copy pasted from the Hello World ECS that Unity has. The only difference I did was, actually I didn't do any differences. I just have unit spawner instead of hello spawner. So it wasn't that different from our unit spawner system. I think I kept our old system over here. So all we were doing was looking for a unit spawner and translation, and then we convert it to entity array, and then we just spawned hard-coded 15 times, got the shared component data, instantiated it, and then added all our stuff. And the new way down here is, again, this is not all my code, this is all of Unity's code, but basically, if you think about it, we have our onCreate, we create our world in here, and then in here, in our spawn job, we have iJob for each with entity. And I use the same code, spawner, but instead we have this new spawner object that has our count X and Y, and then we can just instantiate the prefab. So just a lot more cleaner to instat our entity over here. I add a position and RABB, which I have a to-do over here. Eventually want to switch to the new Unity physics system that just recently came out, but for now we're just going to use ours since it works, and I didn't want to pack too much into one video. And over here I add our new components. I say weirdly have to do it in code now. I just added this comment for me because I added it to the prefab in the entity, but it wasn't working, so I just add it like this, and I actually prefer it like this. Keeps it much more sane, and you don't have to keep track it in too many places. So let's go back to the unit spawner proxy and just look at what's going on in here. So reference prefabs have to be declared for the conversion system. So we just add our prefab that we added, and to my knowledge, you can add any prefab that you would normally do in mono behavior. So this is a much better system than, you know, me or anyone having to write their own renderer for that kind of stuff. And then we have a convert here. They have a little bit more advanced samples over here, but for us, we're not actually converting anything except for the prefab. Everything else is just, you know, ints and data. But if you did have like nav mesh agents and things like that, ideally I think you could convert to an entity system. So that's pretty cool. And then let's finish off with the unit spawner system. Destroy entity, that was the same as we had up here where we destroyed our spawner so that we're not constantly making units. And then since it's a job system, we gotta schedule it and then return the job for the job system. So if we go back over here, I have two spawners actually. A unit spawner, I guess I should name it unit spawner, and highlight spawner. And highlight spawner, I'll talk a little bit about why I still kept this system, but basically I couldn't figure out a way to convert prefabs in code, so I just have a highlight spawner that just waits around to spawn highlights. And I don't know if you guys have a better way for this, but right now basically I'm just gonna have a spawner for every single prefab I want to spawn in the game. If there's a better way, I'm sure in the unit spawner someone's gonna be like, oh, just use the unit spawner and have 50 prefabs on here. Well, I would like to delete them as soon as I don't need them anymore, but maybe that's something further down the line. So now let's get into our main components. So, and we're not going to go through all of these. Just well, I did have to change all of these, but you'll get the pattern as soon as I start talking about it. So, this is much more simplified. It's just an iComponent data. Let me see if I have my previous GitHub changes. So how it used to look like our AAB component before is we had a component data wrapper, and that way we could add it in the editor, but they removed this and changed it to component data proxy. So I had to manually change all of our components to use component data proxy, and then as you can see, I actually just deleted all the component data proxies. Don't need it for virtually all of them. So now that we're doing it in the code, as you saw in the unit spawner system. So just going to show that deselecting highlight component, highlight spawner, highlight spawner proxy. So this is where we get to the first new, I think we already talked about highlight spawner proxy actually. So we can continue moving forward. Don't use move speed yet. Nav agent, I did change it to unit nav agent. Reason being is a lot of people were getting confused thinking it was Unity's nav agent system that I was using, and so I just decided to change it to unit nav agent, just to make it very clear that we're not actually using anything. So moving forward, as you can see, we pretty much simplified a lot of our components. So it's really starting to feel like a very ECS-like, where we just have these datas. Our unit spawner, as you saw, it just contains these three things. So we can now close all these. And proxy, which we talked about. Oh, I guess we didn't talk about the highlight spawner proxy, but as you can see, it's literally the same thing, except we just don't have a count because we're only ever adding one highlight at one per entity. So time to get back into the systems, and as you can see, we're almost done. I mean, this is a pretty small project. Nothing changed here. It's a job component system and iJob parallel for. Basically had to change R to onCreate manager. Actually, I thought that was deprecated, but anyways, I'm sure I could just change it to create manager whenever that happens. And now we have this new entity query desk. This is new and only but name. It looks exactly like how we had it before, except we just changed it. Let me just pull up the GitHub here. So you saw we had component group and entity query, and nothing changed except for the name. So actually, maybe I'll go through the GitHub commit changes. So our movement job, instead of process component data, is iJob for each, and position now becomes translation. Nothing new there. And so if we just keep going, we just see that it's a lot of it is just changed highlights. So I want to get to now we're using bool in our player input system. That's good. But other than that, it's just naming changes. So nothing crazy here. You might be wondering why I'm making this video. A lot of people were having problems wondering what changed, and for our previous videos, a lot of that is now outdated. So this is kind of like a middle ground to kind of show like why everything changed and things like that. So the only system I did have to change is our selecting system and I believe our deselect system. No, that is the same. So our selecting system. So and this is where the highlight spawner comes into action. So you see these entity query, very clean one-liners to grab our two different queries. And on the update, I'm just doing this using statement. And basically, we grab the prefab and we add our entity add component of highlight so that we can track this later on when we want to do stuff on the highlight itself. And now the reason why we had to change is there's no attached anymore. So basically, we have to do what attached used to be doing. And as you can see, I'm setting the translation, which is basically position of our highlight, to be underneath the cube. So you might want to change this Y if you have taller cubes, if you have different prefabs. Depending on where their center point is, you want to be half of that center point, at least below. And you need 3 things for a child to successfully attach itself to a parent. You need a local to world, which we grab from our selected unit. So when we're going through all the different selected units, and then we need to add a local to parent. And that local parent is what we just grabbed from our selected unit over here. So remember, the parent's local to world is the child's local to parent. Say it 5 times, it'll make sense. And then finally, after that, and order is actually important because once you add it to the parent, translation becomes local to the parent. So this is important to have this in order. And at this bottom over here, we just set the parent to selected unit. So now you have the child is able to track appropriately their parent. However, the parent cannot track the child, which is kind of frustrating. I wasn't able to successfully do that. Over here, you'll see in our deselect system, we grab the highlight itself and not the deselected, the parent that is currently deselecting. And what I do here is for every highlight, we basically check if that component has a deselecting, and then we remove the component and destroy the entity itself. This is pretty inefficient, and this is kind of at the top of my list to fix. Maybe like second top. My first is to get that sweet physics system in, but we'll see as we move forward. But basically, this is running it's only a couple milliseconds, so it's not crazy. But as we start getting to million of units, then this maybe become a problem. So we'll attack that problem a little bit later. However, everything else is pretty much the same. This is a pretty quick video. I'll hopefully be attaching this to my previous videos so that people can kind of understand why everything's not working in our previous videos anymore. And hopefully this was a little bit clear on just like very high level overview on everything that changed. Of course, you could just download the project and then just compare it to the old project, or just look at the commits on YouTube. But for that, I think we're good with this video. I hopefully have a couple of other videos coming out soon, detailing a preview of the physics system before we implement it, and then actually implementing the physics system in this project. So, thank you for watching. Tell your friends about me, and I'll see you in the next video.